Hello, it's design time.
Hello and welcome back. We're going to be doing another design video this week. This week, I'm going to be showing you how I designed the first in my dinosaur series. Don't forget to hit the like button if you like this kind of video, subscribe so that you don't miss the pattern. And if you have any questions about how I go about designing things or about any part of the design process, leave them in the comment section below and I'll try and address them next week. So step one, the idea. Right, so because I'm doing a dinosaur series, not just a dinosaur pattern, there's a few other considerations that I take into account right at the early stage. And the first one is color. I want all of the dinosaurs to look like they belong to the same world and they all need to look nice together as well. So one of the first things I do is I pick my palette. So I have here a cacophony of Cretaceous colors and Triassic toads. And yes, I do think I'm pre-hysterical. And next up, I choose the kind of eyes I want to use across all the creatures. And I've decided to use these 15mm ones, which have that transparent band on them. I may paint them different colors, but I'll be using the same size on all of them. So as to which dinosaur to start with, basically I chucked a poll up on Patreon, they voted, and the Ankylosaurus won.
Step 2, research and reference.
So from there, because I knew I was doing an Ankylosaurus, I looked up a couple of images just to refresh what that looks like. And then I discarded them all and drew a cute little bubbly version of them instead. So during this phase, I always make it a point to draw my idea from multiple different angles, just because it makes it a lot easier to move on to step 3, which is breaking it down into shapes. So one of the things that always kind of bothers me a little bit about doing amigurumi is the fact that we never get the chance to play with the really fancy stitches. That all seems to be reserved for the blanket people, and I'm not a blanket person. Just for the record though, if you are a blanket person, I really admire your ability to work on massive projects. I just don't have the attention span for it. But what I thought might be fun is trying to incorporate some of those fancy stitches into my projects. You know how a sampler blanket lets you try out a bunch of different stitches? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and use a different kind of fancy stitch or technique in each one of the dinosaurs. I don't know, samplersauruses? And the reason I'm bringing it up here is because when I was looking at those reference images, I realized that the waffle stitch would be perfect for creating his armor. So the concept for Waffles the Ankylosaurus was born.
And leave me a comment telling me what's your favorite fancy stitch. Maybe I can try incorporating it into one of my dinosaurs. Step 3, break it down. So I looked at my reference sketches and from there I broke it down into pieces. So one piece from the head down to the tip of the tail, 4 little legs, and then a sort of blanket piece for the back armor, and then a little hat to act as his helmet.
As part of this stage, as per usual, I looked at the lines of symmetry and saw how best I wanted to approach these pieces, particularly that head to the tail piece. I do usually prefer my stitches to lay horizontally, but in some cases they just have to lay vertically, and this is a great example of how the construction could be vastly simplified just from working from one end to the other instead of trying to work from the bottom up.
Step 4, make the pieces.
So from there I made the main head and body piece as well as all of the legs, and then I started working on the waffle stitch blanket that's going to be making up his armor. Now I had a couple of goes at this just to try and get the sizing right, and the first one, as you can see in this little guy, ended up stretched quite tightly. And I ended up making a slightly bigger one for the main pattern just to really emphasize that grid work.
And then I whipped up a little hat.
Then we moved on to step 5, which is the assembly.
Step 5, assembly.
So when I go to sew my creations together, there's a couple of things that I do to try and make them look a little bit better. So the first kind of trick is I stitch only between the gaps in the stitches to join the two together. It gets you closer to a seamless look. So the other kind of trick, which is really very much cheating, that I do is I cover up as many seams as I can. So for this particular piece, we're going to be using that waffle blanket to cover up the seams where the legs join the body, and it'll give you an almost seamless appearance. So I do find that the tools you use make a really big difference. You'll note that in a lot of my videos, you'll see me working with these curved needles, and I find that they give me just a really great degree of precision when sewing the different pieces together. They aren't as fancy as they look. You can probably find them in your local craft store as well. I actually think that these ones here were labeled like lamp mending or something crazy. So don't be afraid to try different things to see what works for you.
Step 6, review.
So the final step in this particular design process is actually reviewing the design itself. Because it's the first in a series, there are going to be certain elements of it that I'm going to want to carry through. It's kind of setting the standard. So I noted down things like the sculpting techniques that I used for things like eyebrow ridges and feet. I'm making a note of the width of the legs, because if I'm making any other quadruped, I'm going to be wanting to use similar widths of legs just to keep everything to scale, as well as things like overall size and the number of stitches around that I've used. So things like that I'm going to want to carry through the series just to keep everything looking like it's part of the same world. So there is our finished ankylosaur, and I hope to see you on Thursday when I show you how to make him. Okay, bye!